London, November 1823. The fog that night was not merely weather. It was a living thing that swallowed the city whole. It rolled off the Thames in thick, suffocating waves, carrying the scent of coal smoke, wet cobblestones, and the distinct metallic tang of the river. In the district of Covent Garden, where vice wore a mask of velvet and gold, the mist served a specific purpose. It hid the faces of men who had reputations to lose. A black carriage, devoid of any crest or identifying marks, emerged from the gloom like a hearse. The horses, magnificent black beasts that cost more than most men earned in a lifetime, struck the wet stones with a rhythm that sounded like a military drumbeat. The vehicle did not slow for the pedestrians who scattered into the shadows. It claimed the centre of the road with an arrogance that belonged to only a handful of families in England. Inside, Adrian Cliveden, the Duke of Harrogate, sat in absolute stillness. He did not look out the window. There was nothing in this part of London that interested him. His gloved hands rested atop the silver head of his cane, his posture rigid, his dark blue eyes fixed on the empty seat opposite him. At 34, Adrian was a man carved from discipline and duty. He was not known for his patience, nor for his mercy. Tonight, he was not a duke enjoying the diversions of the capital. He was a man performing a sanitation duty. The carriage halted abruptly before a building that blazed with light against the grey fog. The Gilded Lily. The name was written in gold leaf above the door. It was an establishment that straddled the line between a high-stakes gambling hell and a brothel of the most expensive variety. "Wait here!" Adrian ordered his coachman through the hatch. His voice was a low baritone, crisp and devoid of warmth. "If I am not back in 20 minutes, come in with the pistol." He stepped out into the chill air, his heavy greatcoat shielding him from the drizzle. The doorman, a brute of a man with a nose that had been broken more than once, moved to block his path. He took one look at Adrian's face, the hard set of the jaw, the cold intelligence in the eyes, the sheer, undeniable aura of power, and stepped aside without a single word. Adrian Cliveden did not need to announce himself. His authority was a physical weight in the air. Inside, the heat hit him like a physical blow. The air was cloying, thick with the scent of heavy perfume, spilled wine, and beeswax. Chandeliers, dripping with crystal tears, cast a golden, forgiving light over the patrons. Men in fine evening coats laughed too loudly, while women in silk gowns that left little to the imagination drifted between them like beautiful, poisonous flowers. Adrian moved through the crowd, untouched and untouchable. He ignored the heads that turned, the whispers that followed in his wake. He was not here for pleasure. He was here for Arthur. He found his nephew in a private alcove near the baccarat tables. Arthur, barely 20 years old and already dissolving into a puddle of dissipation, was slumped in a chair, a glass of brandy tilting dangerously in his hand. His cravat was undone. His face flushed with drink and the false euphoria of a winning hand that had likely turned into a losing one hours ago. "Arthur," Adrian said. He did not raise his voice, yet it cut through the din of the room like a blade. The young man jerked upright, spilling the brandy onto his velvet breeches. He blinked, trying to focus. "Uncle? I didn't expect—" "Clearly," Adrian interrupted, his tone icy. "Stand up. I was just— The cards were turning, Uncle. I felt it. One more hand and I would have recovered the losses. You have lost £3,000 in 2 weeks, Arthur. You are not recovering anything. You are drowning." Adrian signalled to the shadows behind him, where his 2 personal guards had materialised. "Take him. The carriage is waiting. He goes directly to the country estate in Kent. He is not to leave the grounds. He is not to have access to funds. And he is not to have visitors until I say otherwise." "You can't do this!" Arthur wailed, a sound that drew stares from the nearby tables. "My debts! Madame O'Connell said I couldn't leave until—" "I will handle them, madam," Adrian said, turning his back on his nephew. He did not watch as Arthur was hauled away, protesting weakly. The boy was soft, a quality Adrian despised, but he was blood. And the Cliveden name would not be dragged through the mud of debtor's prison, no matter how much the boy deserved it. As the guards dragged the weeping boy out, a woman materialised from the hallway that led to the private rooms. She was a striking woman, older, with eyes that had seen every sin London had to offer and monetized them all. "Madame O'Connell." "Your Grace," she said, dipping into a curtsy that was mocking in its depth. "You cause quite a stir. That boy was my best customer this month. He is a child playing with fire." Adrian replied, his voice flat. "And you are the one selling him the matches. I assume you have a private office where we might conclude this distasteful business. I wish to settle his account and ensure he is barred from this place permanently." "Of course." She gestured with a fan made of peacock feathers. "This way, Your Grace. The office is quiet." Adrian followed her down a narrow corridor lined with doors. Behind them, he could hear muffled giggles and the clinking of glass. He felt a wave of revulsion. He was a man of the world, not a monk, but there was something about the commercialization of intimacy that he found deeply sordid. He preferred the cold clarity of contracts and land deeds. The office was at the very end of the hall. It was a surprising space, cluttered, smelling of ink and old paper, contrasting with the performative luxury of the main salon. A large mahogany desk dominated the room, covered in ledgers. "The boy owes £450, Madame O'Connell said, moving behind the desk and opening a heavy book. "Champagne, cards, and specialized company." Adrian withdrew a leather book from his coat. He did not haggle. Haggling implied that the money mattered to him, or that he respected the person he was negotiating with. He counted out the banknotes and placed them on the desk with precise, deliberate movements. "This covers it, and it buys his banishment. If I hear he has crossed your threshold again, madam, I will not come with banknotes. I will come with the magistrate and a writ to close this house down for moral indecency." The madam smiled, tucking the money into a drawer with practiced speed. "You are a hard man, Duke. But money speaks louder than threats in my world. The boy is barred." Adrian turned to leave immediately. The business was done. He wanted the clean, cold air of the street. He wanted to wash the scent of lavender and stale smoke from his clothes. He reached for the brass handle of the door, his hand gloved in white leather. But as he turned, his gaze swept across the room one last time, a reflex of a man who always assessed his surroundings. The room was dimly lit, shadows clinging to the corners, but on the far wall, half obscured by a heavy velvet drape that had been pulled partially aside, a gold frame caught the flicker of the candlelight. Adrian froze. His heart gave a single violent thud against his ribs, a sensation so foreign to him that for a second he thought he was having a spasm. He dropped his hand from the door latch. He took a step toward the wall, his boots silent on the Persian rug. He needed to be sure. It was a trick of the light. It had to be. He reached out and shoved the velvet drape aside with a violence that made the fabric hiss. The painting was revealed in full. It was a portrait of a woman. She was seated on a simple stone bench, surrounded by the suggestion of a summer garden, hydrangeas and ivy. She wore a gown of sapphire blue silk, the fabric shimmering as if painted with liquid light. Her hair, a cascade of golden blonde that looked like spun honey, was pinned up loosely, a few rebellious tendrils escaping to frame a face that Adrian knew better than his own. Elara, his wife, the Duchess of Harrogate. Adrian felt the air leave his lungs. The room seemed to tilt. He stared at the painted face. The artist had captured her perfectly. The curve of her neck, the delicate arch of her brow. But the eyes were wrong. In his memory, Elara's green eyes were defiant. They were the eyes of a woman who had stood in his library 5 years ago and denied everything, even as her brother stood there with the damning letters. But in this painting, her eyes were filled with a sorrow so profound, so crushing, that it felt like a physical weight emanating from the canvas. She wasn't looking at the viewer. She was looking down, her hands resting in her lap, empty. It was a portrait of a woman mourning something she had not yet lost, or perhaps something she had lost long ago. "Where did you get this?" His voice was a whisper, a rasp of sound that barely carried across the room. Madame O'Connell looked up from her ledger, surprised by the shift in his tone. She saw the Duke standing before the painting, his back rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "That?" She squinted at the canvas. "A pretty thing, isn't it? Though a bit melancholy for a place like this. Gentlemen usually prefer smiles, or a bit more exposed skin. But the technique is exquisite. Adrian spun around. The movement was so sudden, so predatory, that the madam actually flinched, her hand hovering over the drawer where she kept a small pistol. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He placed his hands on her desk, leaning down until he towered over her. The cold indifference was gone from his face, replaced by a dark, terrifying intensity. "I asked you a question," he said, enunciating every word. "Where did you get it?" "A pawnbroker," she answered quickly, sensing that this was not a man to be toyed with. "In Cheapside, about 6 months ago. I was looking for decoration for the Blue Room. He sold it to me for a song." "A pawnbroker," Adrian repeated. The word tasted like ash and bile. "And who sold it to him? Did he say?" "He told me the story," the madam said, shrugging slightly, trying to regain her composure. "Said it was a woman who brought it in. Came in during a storm, soaked to the bone. He said she was wearing a hooded cloak, trying to hide her face, but he could tell she was quality. Or used to be. Her hands were rough," he said, but her voice was high-born. Adrian's grip on the edge of the mahogany desk tightened until the wood groaned under the pressure. "Go on," he commanded. "She was desperate," the madam continued, her voice lowering. "Begged him for a better price. Said it was the last thing of value she owned in the world. She needed the money for a doctor." The world seemed to stop. The sounds of the brothel outside, the laughter, the music, faded into a buzzing silence. "A doctor?" Adrian asked. "That's what the pawnbroker said. She told him her child was burning up with fever. The apothecary wouldn't give her credit anymore. She sold the painting, her own likeness, by the looks of it, to buy medicine and coal. A child." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and impossible. Adrian stepped back, his mind reeling. He felt as if he had been struck in the chest with a hammer. More than 4 years. It had been more than 4 years since he had sent Alara away to Willow Creek. More than 4 years since he had banished her for infidelity, but he had not cast her out into the streets. He was Adrian Clevedon. He did not starve women. "That is impossible," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "She has an allowance. £500 a month. What?" "Well," the madam said dryly, "whoever she is, she didn't have 500 pence, let alone pounds." The pawnbroker said she looked half-starved, thin as a rail. He said the only colour on her was the fever in her cheeks. Adrian looked back at the painting. The blue dress. He remembered that dress. He had commissioned the fabric from Paris for her trousseau. She had worn it once, to a dinner shortly after their wedding. If the woman in the pawnbroker's shop was Alara, and she was selling this, suspicion, dark and ugly, uncoiled in his gut like a serpent. Was it the lover? The man she had supposedly betrayed him with? Had she taken the allowance he sent and squandered it on him? Had they gambled it away, just like his nephew? But the madam's words echoed in his mind, soaked to the bone, hands rough, half-starved. And the child. Alara had been childless when she left. If there was a child now, a child young enough to need a mother's desperate care, whose child was it? The timeline twisted in his mind. 5 years. If the child was 4, or nearly 5, how much? Adrian asked. He didn't turn around. He couldn't take his eyes off the sorrowful face in the frame. "It's not for sale," Madame O'Connell began, sensing an opportunity. "It fits the room perfectly and—" Adrian turned his head. The look he gave her was so lethal that her words died in her throat. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out not the banknotes, but a heavy gold signet ring he carried as a spare. It bore the crest of the Clivedons, a hawk gripping a sword. He tossed it onto the ledger. It landed with a heavy, solid thud that spoke of pure gold. "That ring is worth more than this entire building, and every soul inside it," Adrian said softly. "I am taking the painting, and you are going to forget you ever saw it. If I hear a single whisper that the Duchess of Harrogate's likeness was hanging in a house of ill repute, I will return, and I will burn this place to the ground." He didn't wait for her consent. He walked back to the corner, lifted the heavy gold frame from the hook with a single, fluid motion and tucked it under his arm. He held it protectively, shielding the painted face from the sordid room. He walked out. He didn't look at the madam again. He stormed down the hallway, the painting pressed against his side like a shield. Outside, the rain had started to fall in earnest. It was a cold, biting downpour that turned the streets into rivers of black sludge. The fog swirled around him, but the heat of the brothel was gone, replaced by a chilling clarity. The coachman jumped down from the box as Adrian approached, splashing in the mud to open the carriage door. "To the townhouse, Your Grace. The boy is already on his way to Kent with the guards." "No," Adrian said. He handed the painting carefully into the carriage, placing it on the velvet seat opposite his own, face up. Then he climbed in. The interior was dark, but a flash of lightning illuminated the portrait for a split second. The blue dress seemed to glow. Adrian sat back, his heart pounding a rhythm of dread and fury. He thought of the £500. He thought of the letters from his solicitor, confirming the transfers to Lord Vance meant for Alara. He thought of Eamon Vance, his brother-in-law, with his easy smile and his new horses. He said she was happy, Adrian thought. He said she was living quietly. He said she didn't want to write. But a woman does not sell her likeness to a pawnbroker if she is happy. A woman does not starve if she has £500 a month. Something was wrong. The math did not add up. The logic was fractured. And Adrian Cliveden was a man who could not abide a broken equation. "Your Grace," the coachman asked, standing in the rain, confused by the delay. "Where to?" Adrian looked away from the painting. He looked out into the wet, black night of London. His eyes were hard, but beneath the anger, there was the first stirring of fear. "Yorkshire," Adrian said. The coachman blinked, wiping rain from his face. "Yorkshire, Your Grace? Tonight? In this storm? It's a 3-day journey, and the roads will be—" "Tonight," Adrian commanded, his voice cutting through the wind. "We ride for Willow Creek. Change horses at every post. We do not stop for sleep. We do not stop for food. We drive until we reach the gate. As you wish, Your Grace." The door slammed shut, sealing Adrian in the darkness with the silent image of his wife. The carriage lurched forward, swaying violently as the coachman cracked the whip. The wheels clattered over the cobblestones, picking up speed, leaving the lights of the brothel behind. Adrian sat alone in the dark, his hand resting on the hilt of his cane, his knuckles white. He was racing north into the storm to find a ghost he had tried to bury 5 years ago. And for the first time in his life, the Duke of Harrogate was afraid of what he would find. The Great North Road, November 1823. The journey north was a descent into purgatory. For 3 days and 3 nights, the black carriage tore across the spine of England, a dark projectile hurled against the teeth of a storm that refused to break. The rain did not merely fall. It assaulted the earth, turning the roads into rivers of churning brown sludge that sucked at the wheels and exhausted the horses. At every posting in, Adrian commanded fresh teams with a terrifying urgency, tossing coins to stable masters who looked at the sky and crossed themselves, muttering that no man with a soul would travel in such weather. Inside the carriage, the air was cold enough to see one's breath, but Adrian Cliveden felt none of it. He sat in a silence that was louder than the thunder rolling over the Derbyshire peaks. Opposite him, propped up on the velvet seat like a silent passenger, was the portrait. In the daylight, what little of it penetrated the grey shroud of the storm, the painting seemed to change. The blue of Alara's dress looked less like silk and more like a bruise. The sorrow in her painted eyes seemed to deepen with every mile they put between London and the truth waiting in Yorkshire, in. Adrian slept in fits and starts, his dreams haunted by fragmented images, the stack of ledgers in his solicitor's office, the easy smile of his brother-in-law, Eamon Vance, and the gaunt, desperate face the pawnbroker had described. "She is lying," a voice whispered in his mind, the voice of the betrayed husband who had festered in bitterness for 5 years. She sold the painting to fund a vice. The poverty is a performance. She has taken the £500 a month and laughed at you. But another voice, quieter and more dangerous, argued back. A woman does not feign starvation. A woman does not sell her face to a stranger if she has gold in her purse. By the time the carriage crossed the boundary into his own lands in Yorkshire, Adrian was a man existing on the razor's edge of sanity. He had not shaved in 3 days. A shadow of dark stubble lined his jaw, making him look less like a duke and more like a brigand. His clothes were immaculate, but he felt dirty, coated in the grime of suspicion. The carriage slowed as they turned off the main turnpike onto the private road leading to Willow Creek. This was the Dower House, the traditional residence of Cliveden widows, situated 10 miles from the main seat of Harrogate. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place of quiet dignity. Adrian looked out the window, wiping the condensation from the glass with a gloved hand. What he saw made the blood freeze in his veins. The entrance gates, wrought iron masterpieces commissioned by his grandfather, were hanging off their hinges. One side had fallen completely into the ditch, half buried in dead leaves and mud. The stone pillars, once topped with proud stone falcons, were crumbling, the masonry eaten away by unchecked ivy that looked more like a parasite than decoration. "Drive on!" Adrian barked, though the coachman was already struggling to navigate the rutted, overgrown drive. Branches whipped against the side of the carriage, screeching like banshees. The avenue of ancient oaks, which should have been trimmed and majestic, had become a dark tunnel of twisting limbs that blocked out the sky. They rounded the final bend, and the house revealed itself. It was a corpse of a building. The Dower House was a Georgian structure of pale stone, elegant in its proportions, but it looked as though it had been abandoned for a decade. Shutters hung askew, banging rhythmically in the wind against the stone. Several windows on the upper floor were boarded up with rough planks, like bandaged wounds. The immaculate lawn that Adrian remembered from his youth was gone, replaced by a sea of knee-high weeds and brambles that choked the front steps. There was no smoke rising from the main chimneys. The house was dark, silent, and imposing in its desolation. Only a faint, erratic wisp of grey smoke curled from the rear of the building. The kitchen stack. The carriage lurched to a halt before the main entrance. The horses were blowing hard, their sides heaving, steam rising from their flanks into the freezing rain. Adrian kicked the door open before the footman could scramble down. He stepped out into the mud, his boots sinking inches deep into the neglected drive. The rain hit him instantly, soaking his heavy greatcoat, but he didn't feel it. He stared up at the house. There were no lights, no servants rushing out with umbrellas, no sign of life. "Wait here," he ordered the coachman, his voice lost in the wind. He walked up the stone steps. Moss had made them slippery. The front door, a massive slab of oak, was scarred and weather-beaten. The brass knocker was missing, leaving only a discoloured outline where it had once been. Sold. Adrian didn't bother to knock. He tried the handle. Locked. He pounded on the wood with his fist, a heavy, authoritative sound. "Open this door." Silence answered him. He pounded again. "Elara, open this door." Nothing but the wind howling around the corners of the stone. A terrible dread began to coil in his stomach, heavier than the anger. He left the front door and moved around the side of the house, pushing through overgrown laurel bushes that soaked his trousers. He headed for the servants' entrance at the back. The kitchen courtyard was a scene of devastation. The cobblestones were loose, weeds sprouting between them. The stables to the left were derelict, the roof sagging dangerously. There were no horses, no carriages, not even a dog to bark at the intruder. He reached the kitchen door. It was unlatched. It swung open with a groan of rusted metal that set his teeth on edge. Adrian stepped inside. The transition was jarring. He expected the warmth of a kitchen, the smell of roasting meat or baking bread. Instead, he was hit by a wall of damp, stale air that smelled of boiled cabbage and lye soap. The kitchen was a cavernous room with a vaulted ceiling, designed to feed a household of 20. Now it felt like a tomb. The massive iron range was cold and dark. In the smaller hearth to the side, a pathetic fire sputtered, fed by twigs and what looked like broken furniture legs rather than proper coal. And there was a sound. Scrub, scrub, scrub. It was the rhythmic, harsh sound of a stiff brush against stone. Adrian took a step forward, his boots clicking on the flagstones. His eyes adjusted to the gloom. In the centre of the vast floor, a figure was on its hands and knees. It was a woman. She was facing away from him, bent over a bucket of grey, sudsy water. She wore a dress of rough, scratchy wool in a colour that might have once been grey, but was now stained and faded. It was the kind of garment a scullery maid in a poorhouse would wear, shapeless and frayed at the hem. A coarse kerchief was tied over her hair, hiding it completely. She scrubbed with a ferocious, desperate intensity, her shoulders moving with the effort. Adrian stood frozen. The image before him refused to reconcile with the reality he knew. This was the Duchess of Harrogate. This was the woman who received £500 a month. "I told you, Mr. Higgins," the woman said, her voice not stopping the rhythm of the scrubbing. "I will have the coin by Friday. I am expecting a payment." Her voice. It hit Adrian like a physical blow. It was raspy, broken, as if she hadn't spoken to another human being in days, but the cadence was unmistakable. It was the cultured, melodic tone of the aristocracy, currently sharpened by exhaustion. "Ilara," Adrian said. The name hung in the damp air. The scrubbing stopped instantly. The figure on the floor went rigid. For a long, agonizing second, she didn't move. Then, slowly, as if her joints were rusted like the gate hinges outside, she sat back on her heels. She turned to face him. Adrian felt the breath leave his body. He had spent 3 days staring at the portrait of a beautiful, sorrowful woman in a blue silk dress. He was prepared for sadness. He was not prepared for this. The woman before him was a skeleton wrapped in skin. Her face, once round and glowing with health, was gaunt, the cheekbones jutting out sharply, creating hollows that were filled with dark purple shadows. Her skin was the colour of old parchment, pale and translucent. Her lips were cracked from the cold, but it was her hands that horrified him the most. As she rested them on her thighs, he saw they were red, raw, and swollen. Chilblains covered her knuckles. The nails were broken, dirt ground deep into the cuticles. These were not the hands of a lady who painted watercolours and played the pianoforte. These were the hands of a labourer. She looked at him. Her eyes, those piercing, intelligent green eyes, widened. Shock registered there, followed immediately by something that looked painfully like shame, before hardening into a mask of icy indifference. She didn't try to stand. She didn't have the strength, or perhaps she simply refused to grant him the courtesy. "You," she whispered. The word was flat, devoid of emotion. "Stand up," Adrian said. His voice was rough, trembling with a mixture of rage and horror. He needed her to stand up. He needed her to be the Duchess, not this broken thing on the floor. "Stand up, Ilara." She let out a sound that was half laugh, half cough. She reached out, gripping the edge of the heavy wooden work table, and pulled herself up. Her movements were stiff, painful to watch. She stood before him, swaying slightly, looking small and fragile in the vast, cold kitchen. "To what do I owe the honour, Your Grace?" she asked. "Did you come to check if the roof has finally collapsed? Or did you come to take the floorboards too? They are the only things left with any value." Adrian stepped closer, the water dripping from his coat creating a puddle on the clean floor she had just scrubbed. "What is this?" he demanded, gesturing around the empty room. "What is this performance, Ilara? I drive up and find the gates in ruin. I find the house boarded up. I find you, looking like a beggar." "A beggar," she repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, that is accurate." "Where is the money?" Adrian shouted. The volume of his voice made her flinch, but she didn't back down. "I send you £500 a month. £500. That is a fortune. It is enough to keep this house in repair, to keep a full staff, to keep you in silk and velvet. Where is it?" He was advancing on her now, driven by the desperate need to find a villain that wasn't himself. "Did you gamble it away?" he accused, his eyes blazing blue fire. "Is that it? Did you pick up the vice from your brother? Or did you give it to him? To the lover you were planning to run away with? Is he the one who drained you dry and left you here to rot?" Ilara stared at him. For a moment, she looked as if she might strike him. Then, a strange expression crossed her face. It was pity. She started to laugh. It was a terrible sound. Dry, cracking, devoid of any humour. It was the laughter of someone who had seen the bottom of the abyss and found it absurd. £500, she gasped, clutching her side as if the laughter hurt physically. Oh, Adrian, you always were so good with numbers, so precise. She turned away from him, shuffling toward a small, battered cupboard in the corner. Her shoes were worn through. He could hear the drag of leather on stone. You think I have been living in debauchery? She asked, her back to him. You think I have been throwing gold at lovers? She opened the cupboard. It was bare, save for a single bag of oatmeal and a small stack of papers. She pulled out a book, a simple, homemade ledger stitched together with twine. She turned back and threw it onto the table between them. It landed with a dull thud. Read it, she said. Her voice was suddenly strong, steel underneath the exhaustion. Read the credits, Your Grace. Read the column for income. It is very easy to read. It requires no advanced mathematics. Adrian looked at the book. He felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. Read it, she screamed, the control finally snapping. Adrian reached out and opened the book. His hands, usually so steady, were shaking. The pages were filled with neat, cramped handwriting, Ilara's hand. He recognized the loops of the L's and G's. March 1819, income, zeros, expenses, coal, flour, candle wax. February 1819, income, zeros, expenses, doctor for Mrs. Gable. March 1819, income, 0. Sold silver candlesticks to Mr. Henderson. He flipped the pages frantically, month after month, year after year. The column for income from estate was blank, empty, a void. December 1821, income, 0. Sold mother's pearl earrings. Roof leaking in West Wing. No funds for repair. July 1823, income, 0. Sold remaining library books. Sold the sapphire portrait. Adrian stopped. The ink on the last entry was stained, as if a teardrop had fallen there and been hastily wiped away. He looked up. Ilara was watching him, her arms wrapped around herself, as if trying to hold her shattered pieces together. 0, she hissed. I haven't seen a penny, Adrian. Not a single farthing, for 5 years. That's a lie, Adrian whispered, the denial weak on his lips. I have the receipts. My solicitor sends the drafts. Eamon confirms receipt every quarter. He writes to me. He says you are well. He says you ask for nothing because you are living quietly. Eamon! She spat the name. The venom in her voice was absolute. My brother. The man who told you I was unfaithful. The man who brought you the letters. The man who offered to manage my dowry and my allowance so you wouldn't have to deal with the shame of contacting me directly. She took a step closer to the table, leaning over it, her green eyes burning into his. You entrusted the sheep to the wolf, my lord, and you never once checked to see if there was any wool left. Eamon has been intercepting everything, my letters to you, your money to me. He has stripped this estate bare. He sold the furniture. He sold the horses. He sold the very curtains from the windows 2 years ago. Adrian felt the floor tilt beneath his feet. The logic of his world, the tidy columns of his account books, the certainty of his righteousness. It all crumbled into dust. But, he stammered, his mind grasping for purchase. The portrait, the brothel. I know where it ended up, Ilara said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I was told. The pawnbroker sold it to a dealer who sold it to that place. Do you think I care? Do you think my vanity matters? Why? Adrian asked, his voice cracking. Why sell it? Why stay here? Why scrub floors? Why not walk to the village and scream the truth? Why not come to London? I couldn't leave, she said simply. Why? Because walking to London takes money I didn't have. Because the villagers were told by Eamon that I was mad, that I was dangerous, that I was being punished for sins against God. They wouldn't help me. And because, she faltered. Her gaze darted toward the ceiling, toward the darkness of the upper floors. Because of what? Adrian pressed. He needed to know. He needed to understand the depths of his failure. Ilara, tell me, why did you endure this? Why did you starve rather than beg? I did beg, she cried, tears finally spilling over, cutting clean tracks through the grime on her cheeks. I wrote to you every week for the first year. I begged you to send help. Not for me. I would rather die than ask you for a crumb after what you did. But I begged for the sake of the only innocent thing in this wretched house. She slammed her hand down on the table, right next to the ledger. You didn't answer. You never answered. And so I sold everything. I sold my jewelry. I sold my clothes. I sold my dignity. And when there was nothing left, I sold my face. Adrian looked at his wife. He saw the sharp angles of her collarbone. He saw the red, angry skin of her hands. He saw the dress that was little more than a rag, and he realized that the monster in this story was not the woman standing before him. Ilara, he said, stepping around the table. He reached out a hand, wanting to touch her, to verify that she was real, but she flinched away from him as if he were a fire. Don't, she warned, backing up until she hit the cold iron of the stove. Don't you dare touch me with hands that signed my death warrant. You threw me away, Adrian. You don't get to come back now and play the savior because the scenery is uglier than you expected. I didn't know, he whispered. It was a pathetic defense, and he knew it. You didn't ask, she countered. Ignorance is a luxury of the powerful, Adrian. It is not an excuse. The wind howled outside, rattling the kitchen door on its hinges. The fire in the grate sputtered and died, leaving them in the gloom. Adrian stood in the wreckage of his marriage, the ledger between them like a tombstone. He had come to accuse a sinner. Instead, he had found a martyr. And the realization of what he had allowed to happen, the years of cold, hunger, and isolation, crashed over him with the force of the storm outside. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some inadequate word of apology, but the silence of the house was suddenly broken. It was a sound from the floor above, soft, weak, but unmistakable in the quiet. A cough, followed by a small, frightened whimper. Ilara's face changed instantly. The anger vanished, replaced by a terrified, feral protectiveness. She spun around, placing her body between Adrian and the door to the hallway that led to the stairs. She spread her arms, her thin frame trembling. You can take the house, she whispered, her voice fierce. You can take the land. You can burn the ledger, but you are not going up those stairs. Adrian stared at her. The final piece of the puzzle, the one the pawnbroker had mentioned, the one he had feared to believe. A child. He looked at the ceiling, then back at his wife's desperate, guarding stance. The investigation was over. The reckoning had begun. The silence in the kitchen was shattered by the sound from above, a dry, rattling cough that seemed to tear through the damp ceiling and lodge itself directly in Adrian's chest. It was the sound of vulnerability, small and desperate, and it instantly transformed the dynamic of the room. The ledger on the table, the accusations of financial ruin, the shock of Ilara's appearance, all of it evaporated, replaced by a singular primal urgency. Ilara stood before the door leading to the servants' stairs, her arms spread wide. She looked like a wraith, her grey dress hanging loosely on her frame, but her eyes burned with a ferocity that could have stopped an army. She was a lioness standing between a hunter and her cub. Move, Adrian said. His voice was no longer the booming baritone of the Duke giving orders. It was quiet, strained, trembling, with a terrifying mixture of dread and hope. You have no business up there, Ilara hissed, her voice cracking. You forfeited your right to enter these rooms 5 years ago. Go back to London, Adrian. Go back to your clubs and your mistresses, and leave us to die in peace. Us, Adrian repeated, the word tasting like ash. You said us. Who is up there, Ilara? She didn't answer. She only pressed her back harder against the wood, her knuckles white as she gripped the doorframe. Adrian took a step forward. He did not want to touch her. He was afraid that if he laid a hand on her, she might shatter like brittle glass. But the pull of that coughing child was stronger than his propriety. He reached out, not to grab her, but to reach the latch. Ilara, please, he said, and the word was foreign on his tongue. He had not said please to anyone since he was a boy in short trousers. If there is a child, if there is sickness, I have a carriage. I have money. I can bring a doctor. We don't need your money now, she cried, tears spilling over again, cutting through the grime on her face. We needed it when the roof leaked. We needed it when the coal ran out. We needed it when he was born in the middle of winter with no fire in the grate. He, the pronoun hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Adrian's resolve hardened. He gently but firmly took Ilara's wrists. She struggled, kicking at his shins with her worn shoes, sobbing in frustration. But she was weak from years of malnutrition, and he was a man fueled by a sudden, horrific adrenaline. He moved her aside, pinning her gently against the wall with one arm while he threw the door open with the other. "Don't!" she screamed, sliding down the wall as he passed her. "Don't take him! Please, Adrian, don't take him!" Her plea followed him up the narrow, creaking staircase. It was the staircase meant for maids carrying trays, not for the lord of the manor. The wood was rotting in places, and the air grew colder with every step he climbed. The upper hallway was a tunnel of shadows. The wallpaper, once a cheerful floral pattern he remembered from his childhood visits, was peeling in long, damp strips, revealing the grey plaster beneath. Doors stood open to reveal empty rooms, furniture gone, carpets sold, nothing but dust motes dancing in the gloom. But at the end of the hall, a single door was closed. A faint light seeped from beneath it. Adrian walked toward it. His boots, usually confident on marble floors, felt heavy as lead. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the wind howling outside. He reached the door. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his hand hovering over the brass knob. He was terrified. He was the Duke of Harrogate, a peer of the realm, a man who had stared down political rivals and duelists, but he was terrified of what lay behind this door. He turned the handle and pushed. The room was warmer than the rest of the house, though not by much. A fire burned in the grate, small, carefully tended. The air smelled of camphor, dried herbs, and the distinct metallic scent of fever. There was no furniture here either, save for a single wooden chair and a large bed pushed close to the fire. An old woman sat in the chair, her head bowed as she dipped a rag into a bowl of water. She looked up as the door opened, her eyes widening in disbelief. It was Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper who had served the Cliveden family for 40 years. She had chosen to go into exile with Ilara. She looked aged, her back bent, her uniform patched and repatched until the original fabric was barely visible. "Your Grace?" she whispered, rising shakily to her feet. Adrian didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the bed. Buried under a mountain of mismatched quilts, wool blankets, and what looked like an old velvet curtain repurposed as a coverlet, was a small shape. Adrian walked to the bedside. He felt like an intruder in a holy place. He felt unworthy to breathe the air in this room. He looked down. The boy was sleeping fitfully, his breath coming in shallow, wheezing gasps. His skin was flushed with heat, dark hair plastered to his forehead by sweat. He looked small, fragile, as if a strong wind could blow him away. But the face. Adrian gripped the bedpost, his knuckles turning white. The boy had black hair, raven black, straight and thick. The exact shade of Adrian's own. The line of his jaw, even softened by childhood and sickness, was the Cliveden jaw. The nose, the brow. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected time instead of light. As if sensing the presence looming over him, the boy stirred. His eyelids fluttered and opened. Adrian stopped breathing. The eyes that looked up at him were dark blue, not grey, not brown. They were the deep, intense blue of the Atlantic Ocean at midnight. The exact colour that stared back at Adrian every morning when he shaved. There was no doubt. There was no question of DNA, no need for sworn affidavits. The blood that ran in this boy's veins was Adrian's blood. The face was his face. This was his son. "Thomas?" Ilara's voice came from the doorway. She had followed him up, pulling herself together, wiping her face with her apron. She rushed past Adrian, placing herself between him and the bed, checking the boy's forehead with a practiced, frantic hand. "I'm here, darling. Mama is here." The boy, Thomas, looked from his mother to the tall, dark figure looming in the shadows. He shrank back into the pillows, fear clouding his fevered gaze. "Mama," he rasped. "Who is that?" "It's no one," Ilara said quickly, smoothing his hair. "Just a man who is lost." Adrian felt the words, like a physical slap. just a man who is lost. He sank down onto the edge of the bed. His legs simply refused to hold him any longer. He sat there, staring at the boy, his son, who was looking at him with terror. "How old?" Adrian asked. His voice was a ruin. Ilara didn't look at him. She was busy wringing out the cloth Mrs. Gable had been using, placing it gently on Thomas's forehead. "He turned 4 this month," she said quietly. Adrian did the mathematics in his head. 4 years old. He had banished her more than 4 years ago. "You were pregnant," he whispered, "when I sent you away. You were already carrying him." "I was barely 6 weeks along," Ilara said, her voice devoid of emotion, as if she were reciting a grocery list. "I didn't know for certain until I arrived here. I thought it was the stress. But then, the sickness came, and the swelling." "Why didn't you tell me?" Adrian demanded. The anger surged again, but it was defensive now, a shield against the crushing weight of his guilt. "Why didn't you send word? A child changes everything, Ilara. An heir changes everything." She finally turned to look at him, and the expression on her face was one of absolute loathing. "I wrote to you," she said, enunciating every syllable. "I wrote the day I felt him quicken. I wrote when he was born. I wrote when he took his first steps. I wrote when he got the measles last winter and I thought he would die. I wrote 50 letters, Adrian. I sent them to your solicitor. I sent them to your townhouse. I sent them to your club. I never received them," Adrian said. He felt faint. "I swear to you, Ilara, I never saw a single letter." "Because you didn't want to see them," she cried, keeping her voice low so as not to distress the boy, which only made it more intense. "You gave the order. Do not speak her name. Do not bring me her correspondence. Eamon told me. He wrote to me, you know. He told me that you burned my letters unopened. He told me that you said if I tried to pass off a bastard child as yours, you would have me committed to Bedlam." Adrian closed his eyes. The memory of a conversation with his brother-in-law surfaced from the depths of his mind. Eamon, sitting in Adrian's library, pouring brandy, shaking his head sadly. "She writes lies, Adrian, fantasies. She claims to be with child to lure you back. It is a common trick of fallen women. Best to ignore it. Let me handle it. I will spare you the pain." And Adrian, blinded by his wounded pride, had nodded. "Burn them, Eamon. I don't want to read her lies." He had given the order. He had handed the executioner the axe. "Eamon," Adrian whispered. "He lied. About everything. He wanted the money," Ilara said bitterly. "My dowry was substantial, but it was held in trust. As long as I was married but estranged, and you were sending the allowance to him to manage for me, he had access to everything. If I came back, if you knew about Thomas, the flow of gold would stop. He needed me here, hidden, starving and silent." She stroked Thomas's cheek. The boy had drifted back into a restless doze, his small hand gripping Ilara's sleeve. "He told me that if I ever tried to contact you directly, or if I tried to come to London, he would tell you that Thomas was the son of a stable boy. He said you would believe him, because you believed him before. You believed him over me." Adrian looked at his hands. They were large, capable hands. Hands that held reins, signed treaties, wielded swords. But looking at them now, he saw only blood. He had condemned his wife to 5 years of hell. He had allowed his son, his heir, his own flesh and blood, to be born in poverty, to go hungry, to suffer cold and sickness without a doctor. He looked around the room, the peeling wallpaper, the draught coming from the window, the repurposed curtain on the bed. He had done this. Adrian started, but his voice failed him. There were no words in the English language that could bridge the chasm between them. "I did not know. You should have known," Mrs. Gable spoke up from the corner. Her voice was thin and reedy, but it carried the authority of a woman who had once dusted his breeches when he was a boy. "You are the Duke. It is your business to know." Adrian nodded slowly. She was right. He stood up. The motion made Thomas flinch in his sleep. "We are leaving," Adrian said. "Pack what you can. The carriage is outside. We are going to the inn in the village tonight, and tomorrow we will find a proper physician." Ilara stood up, blocking the bed again. "He cannot be moved. The fever is too high. The doctor in the village said the cold air would kill him. Then I will bring the doctor here. Adrian said. I will bring food, coal, blankets. We have no money to pay you, Alara said, her chin lifted in defiance. And I will not be a charity case in my own home. It is not charity, Adrian roared, then caught himself, lowering his voice to a fierce whisper. He is my son. You are my wife. This is my house, and I have failed it. I have failed you. He reached into his coat and pulled out the leather book of banknotes, the same book he had used to pay off his nephew's debts in the brothel. The irony was bitter enough to choke on. He threw it onto the rickety wooden chair. Use it. Burn it for heat if you have to. I don't care. He turned to the door, needing to do something, anything, to fix the unfixable. I am going to the village. I will wake every merchant, every doctor, every coal merchant. I will be back in 2 hours. He stopped at the door and looked back. Ilara was not looking at the money. She was looking at him, and her expression was unreadable. It was not forgiveness. Forgiveness was a continent away. But it was acknowledgement. Adrian, she said. He paused, his hand on the latch. The doctor's name is Dr. Thorne. He lives behind the apothecary. Tell him you are the Duke. He wouldn't come for me yesterday because I still owe him for the last visit. Adrian felt a tear, hot and stinging, leak from his eye. He wiped it away angrily. He will come, Adrian vowed. If I have to drag him by his hair. He walked out of the room, into the cold hallway. He descended the stairs, not as a conqueror, but as a man on a penance. He went out into the storm, shouting orders to his coachman. He unhitched one of the carriage horses himself, mounting it bareback because there was no time to saddle it. He rode into the night, the wind tearing at his clothes, the rain mingling with the salt on his face. He rode with the fury of a man who had found his purpose. He would save the boy. He would save Ilara. And then he would destroy Eamon Vance. 2 hours later, the dower house was transformed. It was not a palace. It was still a ruin, but it was a warm ruin. Adrian had returned with a wagon loaded with coal, blankets, food, and wine. He had brought Dr. Thorne, a startled little man who had been dragged from his bed by a dripping, wet duke. The kitchen fire was roaring now, fed by quality coal that burned hot and bright. The stove was heating water. Upstairs, Dr. Thorne was examining Thomas. Adrian stood by the window, watching. He was soaked to the bone, his fine clothes ruined, but he refused to leave the room. The fever is breaking, Dr. Thorne announced, stepping back from the bed. He needs nourishment, beef broth, warmth, and rest, but the danger has passed. Ilara let out a sob of relief, burying her face in the mattress next to Thomas's hand. Adrian felt his knees go weak. He slumped into the wooden chair in the corner, the adrenaline finally leaving him. He watched them, the mother and the child. They were a unit, a closed circle of love and survival that he was currently outside of. Mrs. Gable came in with a tray of broth. She looked at Adrian, then at the chair he was sitting on. You should sleep, Your Grace, she said stiffly. There is a room at the end of the hall that is less draughty than the others. No, Adrian said. He looked at the bed where his son lay sleeping, his chest rising and falling more peacefully now. I will stay here. Up. There is no bed for you, Ilara said, not looking up from feeding Thomas a spoonful of broth. I will sit, Adrian replied. He settled back into the hard wooden chair. It was uncomfortable. His clothes were damp. He was exhausted beyond measure. But he knew he would not close his eyes tonight. He watched the firelight dance on the walls. He watched the way Ilara smoothed the hair back from Thomas's forehead. He watched the rise and fall of the chest of the heir he had almost killed. The portrait in the brothel had been a shock. The ledger in the kitchen had been a blow. But this boy in the bed, was the anchor that stopped Adrian's world from spinning away. He thought of Eamon Vance, sleeping comfortably in his townhouse in London, likely spending the allowance money on brandy and whores. Adrian's eyes narrowed in the semi-darkness. The blue deepened, becoming almost black. Let Eamon sleep tonight. Let him enjoy his stolen comfort for a few more days. Because when the Duke of Harrogate returned to London, he would bring a storm with him that would make this Yorkshire gale look like a gentle breeze. But for now, his war was here, in this room. His battle was to sit in a hard chair, to endure the silence of his wife, and to watch over the boy who had his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the darkness, so softly that he wasn't sure if he spoke aloud. Ilara didn't answer. She pulled the quilt tighter around Thomas's shoulders, her back to him, a wall of stone. Adrian accepted the silence. He deserved it. He folded his arms, fixed his gaze on his son, and began the first watch of his new life. The village of Willow Creek, November 1823. The dawn broke over Yorkshire, not with the golden promise of a new day, but with a grey, steely light that illuminated the bleakness of the moors. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that was sodden, cold, and stripped of colour. Adrian Cliveden had not slept. He had spent the remaining hours of the night in the wooden chair beside his son's bed, listening to the boy's breathing settle into a rhythm that was less like a rattle and more like a slumber. When the first light touched the peeling wallpaper of the nursery, Adrian stood up. His joints were stiff, his fine clothes wrinkled and stained with mud, but his mind was honing itself into a weapon of singular purpose. He looked at Ilara, who had fallen asleep slumped over the foot of the bed, her hand still resting near Thomas's feet. Even in sleep, her face was etched with exhaustion. She looked fragile, like a porcelain cup that had been glued back together too many times. Adrian left the room silently. He descended the stairs, not as the ghost who had haunted the house the night before, but as the Duke of Harrogate. In the courtyard, his coachman was asleep in the carriage. Adrian woke him with a sharp rap on the door. "The village," Adrian commanded. "The solicitor's office, now." The drive to the village was short. Willow Creek was a small hamlet, a cluster of stone cottages huddled around a church and a muddy main street. It was a place that existed solely because of the estate, yet the estate had failed it, just as it had failed the woman in the dower house. The carriage stopped before a narrow brick building with a sign that read, "Harrington and Pendergast, Solicitors and Estate Management." It was barely 7 in the morning. The office was closed. The windows were dark. Adrian did not care. He walked to the door and kicked it. He did not kick it to knock. He kicked it to break the lock. The wood splintered with a loud crack, and the door swung inward, banging against the wall. Inside, a man in his nightshirt, holding a candle and looking terrified, scrambled out from the back room. It was Mr. Pendergast, the local administrator Adrian had entrusted, via his London agents, to oversee the minor details of the dower house. "Thieves!" Pendergast shrieked, dropping the candle. "I have a pistol. I warn you." "Light the lamp, Pendergast," Adrian said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. "And if you reach for a pistol, I will ensure you lose the hand that holds it." The solicitor froze. He squinted into the gloom of the front office. Your Grace." "The books," Adrian said, stepping over the threshold. He pulled off his damp gloves, finger by finger. The ledgers for Willow Creek, the correspondence with London, the bank drafts, all of it, on the desk. Now, Pendergast went pale. He was a small, oily man who had grown fat on the neglect of his superiors. He began to stammer. "Your Grace, this is highly irregular. The files they are in disarray. I need time to prepare." Adrian moved. He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbed Pendergast by the collar of his nightshirt, and slammed him back against the shelves of legal texts. Dust rained down on them. "I saw my wife scrubbing floors last night," Adrian whispered, his face inches from the solicitor's. "I saw my son shivering under a curtain because there was no coal. Do not talk to me of irregular. Give me the books." 5 minutes later, the lamps were lit. Pendergast sat in the corner, shaking, while Adrian sat at the desk. It was an autopsy of greed. Adrian opened the official estate ledgers. He compared them with the mental notes he had made of Ilara's pathetic stitched-together book in the kitchen. The discrepancy was not just an error. It was a chasm. January 1820, request for roof repairs, $200 approved. The roof at the dower house was still leaking. March 1821, purchase of 2 carriage horses, 150 long. The stables were empty. Monthly allowance transfer, $500. Adrian traced the line with his finger. Where did this go? He asked without looking up. The allowance. It is marked as disbursed. Disbursed to whom? To the account, Pendergast squeaked. Which account? The holding account. In London. Name the holder, Pendergast. The solicitor wiped sweat from his upper lip. Lord Vance. Lord Eamon Vance. He presented letters of attorney. He said the Duchess was unwell. Mentally unwell. He said she could not be trusted with cash. He instructed me to funnel all estate requests through him. And the receipts? Adrian pulled a stack of papers from the file. He saw Ilara's signature at the bottom of a receipt for £500. Ilara Cliveden. He studied it. It was a good forgery. Eamon had always been talented with a pen, but the loop of the C was too flourishy. Ilara's handwriting was spiky, efficient. This was the handwriting of a man who enjoyed the performance of signing. You knew, Adrian said. He looked up. You live 3 miles from the dower house. You knew she was starving. You knew there were no horses. You knew the roof was rotting. And yet, every month, you signed off on these ledgers claiming the estate was being maintained. Lord Vance said, Lord Vance is a thief. Adrian cut him off. But you are the man who watched a woman and a child freeze while you sat here and grew fat. Adrian stood up. He gathered the ledgers, the forged receipts, and the bank drafts. He tied them together with a leather strap. You are finished, Adrian said. I will not call the constable today. That would be too quick. Instead, I am going to write to the Law Society. I am going to write to every landowner in Yorkshire. I am going to seize your assets to repay the theft. You will never sign a legal document in England again. If you are lucky, you might find work sweeping the streets in Manchester. He walked to the small safe in the corner. Open it. Pendergast obeyed, his hands trembling so badly he dropped the key twice. Inside there was a small stack of gold sovereigns and a pouch of silver, petty cash for the practice. Adrian took it all. He didn't count it. He dropped the heavy bag into his coat pocket. Consider this a down payment on the 4 years of misery you facilitated, Adrian said. He left the solicitor weeping on the floor of his office. He walked out into the cold morning air, the evidence of his brother-in-law's treachery tucked under his arm. The legal audit was complete. Now, the emotional accounting had to begin. The return to the dower house was silent. The carriage rattled over the stones, but Adrian felt a strange, cold calm settling over him. He had the proof. Eamon Vance was a dead man walking. He just didn't know it yet, but revenge against Eamon would not put flesh on Ilara's bones. It would not erase the memory of Thomas shivering in that bed. When the carriage pulled up to the house, the scene was different than the night before. Smoke, thick, robust smoke from a proper fire, was pouring from the chimneys. The front door stood open, and Mrs. Gable was shaking a rug on the porch. She stopped when she saw Adrian. She did not bow. She watched him with wary eyes. Where are they? Adrian asked, as he ascended the steps. In the drawing room, Your Grace. It was the only room we could warm up quickly enough. Adrian entered the drawing room. It was a large, elegant space that had been stripped of its grandeur. The spots where paintings had once hung were lighter squares on the faded wallpaper. The velvet curtains were gone. But there was a fire roaring in the hearth, and in front of it, on a pile of blankets, sat Thomas. The boy was awake. He was pale, his eyes huge in his face, but the fever had broken. He was drinking a cup of milk, holding it with both hands. Ilara was sitting beside him on the floor, reading from a book that looked like it was falling apart. She looked up as Adrian entered. The tension in the room was instant. You came back, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of surprise. I told you I would, Adrian replied. He placed the heavy bundle of ledgers on a small side table. I have been to the village. I have the records. I know everything, Ilara. I know about Eamon. I know about the forgeries. Ilara lowered the book. She looked at the ledgers, then back at him. Her expression didn't soften. Knowing changes the past, does it? Does it unstarve us? No, Adrian said gently. He walked closer, but stopped a few feet away, respecting the invisible barrier she had erected. It changes nothing of what you suffered. I cannot fix the last 5 years. I would give my right hand if I could, but I cannot. He looked at Thomas. The boy was watching him over the rim of the cup. Those blue eyes, Cliveden eyes, studied him with a curiosity that broke Adrian's heart. "Who are you?" Thomas asked. His voice was small, raspy from the cough. Elara stiffened. She hadn't told him. Of course she hadn't. Why would she tell her son about the father who had abandoned them? Adrian knelt down. He didn't care about the mud on his breeches. He got down on one knee so he was eye level with the boy. "I am Adrian," he said. He didn't force the title. I am a relative. I have come to take you somewhere warm." "We like it here," Thomas said uncertainly, looking at his mother for cues. "Mama says the castle is for fairy tales." "This isn't a castle, Thomas," Adrian said softly. "And you deserve a castle." He stood up and looked at Elara. "We are leaving. Today." Elara scrambled to her feet. "No, Thomas is not well enough to travel." "Dr. Thorne is waiting in the carriage," Adrian lied, or rather, improvised. He would send the carriage back for the doctor immediately. "We are not going far, just to the main road, then slowly south. But we cannot stay here. This house is a tomb, Elara. It is damp, it is full of rot, and it is full of memories that will poison you if you stay." "I have no clothes," she said, her voice rising. "Look at us, Adrian. We are in rags. Do you intend to parade us through London like this? Is that the final humiliation? To show the world your beggar wife and her bastard son?" "He is not a bastard," Adrian's voice boomed, startling them both. Thomas spilled a little milk. Adrian took a deep breath, reining in his temper. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a piece of parchment he had drafted in the solicitor's office, stamped with the stolen wax of Mr. Pendergast, but signed with the heavy, undeniable hand of the Duke. "Read this," he said, holding it out to her. Elara hesitated, then took the paper. Her hands shook as she read. "I, Adrian Arthur Cliveden, Duke of Harrogate, Earl of Westford, hereby acknowledge Thomas Arthur Cliveden, born November 1819, as my legitimate son and heir apparent to the Dukedom of Harrogate. I grant him all rights, titles and privileges thereof, effective immediately. Any dispute regarding his parentage is to be met with the full force of my estate and legal counsel." It was dated today. It was signed. It was a shield of iron. Elara looked up, her eyes swimming with tears she refused to shed. You haven't even asked for proof. You haven't asked for dates." "I have eyes," Adrian said. "He is my son. And even if he were not, even if he were a changeling dropped by the Fae, he is the boy you starved to save. That makes him mine by debt, if not by blood. But he is blood. I see my father in him. I see myself." He took a step closer. "This document protects him, Elara. If I die tomorrow, he is the Duke. Aemon cannot touch him. The law cannot touch him. He is safe." Elara clutched the paper to her chest. For the first time, her shoulders sagged, the terrible weight she had been carrying for 4 years, lifting just a fraction. Security. That was what she had fought for. "But London," she whispered. "They will talk. They will destroy us with whispers." "Let them talk," Adrian said darkly. "Let them whisper. I am bringing you back not as a penitent, but as a survivor. And anyone who dares to look down on you, they will have to answer to me." He turned to the door. "Mrs. Gable," he called out. The old housekeeper appeared instantly. "Start packing," Adrian ordered. "Only the essentials. We leave everything else. We leave the rags. We leave the broken furniture. We are done with this place." "We have no trunks, Your Grace," Mrs. Gable said pragmatically. "We burned them last winter." "Then wrap what you need in blankets," Adrian said. "I don't care how we look leaving. I only care that we leave." He turned back to Elara. She was still standing there holding the paper. "Elara," he said, "I know you hate me. You have every right to hate me until the sun burns out. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I am asking for your obedience in this one thing. Get in the carriage. Let me take you to a place where the wind doesn't blow through the walls. Ilara looked at Thomas, who was watching Adrian with wide, fascinated eyes. She looked at the document in her hand. Then she looked at the man who had been her husband, her executioner, and now her confusing, terrifying savior. "I will go," she said quietly, "for Thomas." "That is all I ask," Adrian said. The departure was chaotic and swift. Adrian acted as a man possessed. He carried Thomas to the carriage himself, wrapping the boy in his own heavy greatcoat, heedless of the cold hitting his shirt sleeves. He lifted Mrs. Gable into the vehicle. He secured the few bundles of meagre possessions they had salvaged. Ilara was the last to leave the house. She stood on the porch for a moment, looking back at the open door of the dower house. Adrian watched her. He wondered what she was thinking. Was she mourning the years lost? Was she saying goodbye to the ghost of the girl she had been when she arrived? She turned away, her face set like stone, and walked down the steps. Adrian offered his hand to help her into the carriage. She looked at it, the gloved hand of the Duke, and for a second he thought she would refuse. But she took it. Her fingers were cold, rough, and calloused. His were warm and smooth. The contrast burned him. She climbed in and sat next to Thomas, pulling him into her side. Adrian climbed in opposite them. He closed the door, sealing them in. "London," he signaled to the coachman. The carriage lurched forward. They rolled down the overgrown driveway, past the crumbling gates, past the legacy of neglect. Adrian leaned back against the squabs. He looked at the trio across from him. The old woman, the defiant wife, the sick child. They were a motley, ragged group. They looked like refugees. And they were. They were refugees from his own failure. He watched Thomas drift back to sleep, lulled by the motion of the carriage. He watched Ilara stare out the window at the passing moors, her hand still clutching the legal acknowledgement of their son. Adrian's mind began to turn toward the south, toward the capital, toward the townhouse where Eamon Vance was likely sitting by a warm fire, drinking Adrian's wine, laughing about the sister he had buried in the north. Adrian touched the pocket of his coat, where the stolen ledgers rested against the bag of gold he had taken from the solicitor. "Enjoy the warmth while you can, Eamon," he thought, a cold smile touching his lips for the first time in days. "Because winter is coming for you. Are you warm enough?" he asked aloud, his voice breaking the silence. Ilara didn't look at him. She just nodded, a tight, jerky motion. "We will stop at the first decent inn," Adrian promised. "I will buy clothes, proper clothes. You will not enter London looking like this." "I don't care about dresses, Adrian," she said softly, her breath fogging the glass. "I care that my son never has to cough like that again." "He won't," Adrian vowed. "I swear it on my life. He won't." The carriage picked up speed, leaving Willow Creek behind, disappearing into the grey mist of the road. The audit was over. The rescue was underway. But the war was just beginning. The return to London was a re-entry into a world that felt both familiar and fiercely alien to Adrian Cliveden. The journey south had been slow, dictated by the health of a recovering child. But as the carriage wheels finally hit the paved stones of the capital, the rhythm of the city seemed to drum against the carriage walls like a summons to war. The Cliveden townhouse in Mayfair was not merely a home. It was a fortress of limestone and iron, a physical manifestation of the power Adrian wielded. When the carriage halted before the imposing double doors, the gas lamps of the street were just flickering to life, casting long, dancing shadows against the facade. Adrian stepped out first. He did not wait for the footman. He turned and lifted Thomas down, the boy wrapped so thick in wool blankets that only his dark, wide eyes were visible. Then he offered his hand to Ilara. She emerged into the London air, and for a moment, she hesitated. This was the city that had whispered about her disgrace 5 years ago. This was the city that had forgotten her. She wore a heavy cloak Adrian had purchased at an inn in Nottingham, but beneath it, she was still the woman who had scrubbed floors. "Head up," Adrian murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "You are the Duchess of Harrogate. You own the pavement you walk on." Ilara straightened her spine. It was a reflex, a muscle memory of pride that poverty had not managed to atrophy. She took his hand, her grip tight, and descended. The household staff was lined up in the entrance hall. The butler, Mr. Henderson, stood at attention, his face a mask of professional shock. They had not expected the Duke for another week. They certainly had not expected this. Adrian walked in, the mud of Yorkshire still clinging to his boots, carrying the heir to the dukedom in his arms. He looked at the line of servants, maids in crisp aprons, footmen in livery, the chef nervously twisting a towel. "Mr. Henderson," Adrian said. His voice echoed in the cavernous hall. "Your Grace." The butler bowed deeply. We were not prepared." "Clearly," Adrian cut him off. He handed Thomas gently to Mrs. Gable, who had followed them in like a fierce grey watchdog. "Take Lord Thomas to the nursery. Light every fire on the upper floor. If I find a single draught, heads will roll. Lord." "Thomas?" Henderson stammered, his eyes darting to the child. "My son," Adrian said. The silence that followed was absolute. "And your future master. Treat him as such." Adrian turned his gaze to the rest of the staff. He walked down the line, looking into each face. He was looking for loyalty, but more importantly, he was looking for corruption. "Who here was hired by Lord Vance?" he asked quietly. 3 footmen and the under-butler exchanged nervous glances. A maid near the end of the line looked down at her shoes. "Step forward," Adrian commanded. They did, trembling. "You are dismissed," Adrian said. "You will pack your belongings and leave within the hour. You will not speak to anyone on your way out. You will not carry messages. You are gone." "But your Grace," the under-butler protested. "We have nowhere to go at this hour." "You have the reference of Lord Vance," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a lethal chill. "Go to him. Ask him for charity. See if he is as generous with his own coin as he was with mine." He turned his back on them. "Henderson, take the Duchess to the master suite, not the guest rooms. The master suite. She is to have anything she requires. A bath, hot food, tea. If she asks for the moon, you will find a ladder." "Yes, Your Grace." Adrian watched as Alara was led up the grand staircase. She paused halfway, looking back at him. Her expression was unreadable, part relief, part terror. She was back in the cage, but this time, the lion was guarding the door, not stalking her. The next 2 days were a blur of strategic fortification. Adrian did not leave the house. He turned the library into a command centre. He sat behind his massive oak desk, the stolen ledgers from Yorkshire spread out before him like battle maps. He finally read the letters, the 50 letters Alara had written. Aemon had kept them, perhaps as trophies, or perhaps because he was too lazy to burn them. Adrian had found them in a locked drawer in the library, the key to which Aemon had lost years ago. Adrian had broken the lock with a fire poker. Reading them broke him in ways the sight of the Brothel portrait had not. The portrait was static. The letters were a timeline of despair. "My dear Adrian, the baby is coming soon. I am afraid. Adrian, please, the snow is deep and we have no wood. Adrian, Thomas walked today. He has your chin. Adrian, I beg you. Hate me if you must, but save him." He read until his eyes burned, and his chest felt hollowed out by a grief so heavy he could barely breathe. He memorized every plea. He let the ink stain his soul. He needed the pain. He needed it to sharpen the blade he was preparing for Aemon. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the visitor arrived. Adrian had been expecting him. The dismissal of the servants would have sent a signal flare across London. Aemon Vance would know the game had changed, though he likely didn't know the extent of the damage. "Lord Vance is here, Your Grace," Henderson announced. His nose wrinkled slightly. The butler had quickly aligned himself with the new regime once he saw the true heir. "Show him in," Adrian said. He closed the ledger he was reading and placed a heavy book of poetry over it. He picked up a glass of brandy, swirling the amber liquid. He composed his face into a mask of bored affability. Aemon Vance entered the library with the confidence of a man who believes he owns the room. He was handsome in a soft, pampered way, blonde hair carefully styled, a coat of emerald velvet that cost more than the annual income of a modest estate. He smiled, that wide, easy smile that Adrian had once mistaken for friendship. "Adrian!" Aemon exclaimed, walking forward with his hand extended. "My dear fellow, I heard you had returned from the north unexpectedly. I came the moment I heard. What a dreadful journey it must have been in this weather. Adrian did not stand. He did not take the offered hand. He gestured vaguely to the chair opposite the desk. Sit, Eamon. The journey was indeed illuminating. Eamon faltered for a fraction of a second, noting the lack of a handshake, but recovered quickly. He sat, crossing his legs and brushing an invisible speck of dust from his breeches. And how is everything at Willow Creek? Eamon asked, his voice dripping with faux concern. I trust poor Elara is stable. I haven't heard from her in months. I worry so about her state of mind. Adrian took a slow sip of brandy. He watched Eamon over the rim of the glass. He marvelled at the man's audacity. It was an art form. She is surprisingly resilient, Adrian said, considering the circumstances. Oh, I am glad to hear it, Eamon sighed, placing a hand over his heart. I have tried, you know. I have tried to send her extra comforts, little gifts, but she refuses everything. She is so committed to her penance. It breaks a brother's heart. Does it? Adrian asked softly. I imagine it must be difficult, managing the affairs of a mad woman. Exhausting, Eamon agreed, leaning forward confidentially. But one does what one must for family. Speaking of which, Adrian, the quarterly transfer for her allowance, I believe it is due next week. If you wish, I can handle the bank draft as usual. Save you the trouble. The sheer greed of it. The man was staring into the eyes of the wolf and trying to steal the bone from its mouth. That won't be necessary, Adrian said. I have made new arrangements. Eamon's smile tightened at the edges. New arrangements. Adrian, surely you aren't thinking of bringing her back. Think of the scandal. Think of the rumours. Her instability. The rumours are indeed a concern, Adrian mused. He stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the rain-slicked street. But I find that rumours are like weeds, Eamon. You have to pull them out by the root. Quite, Eamon said, sounding uncertain now. But really, Adrian, is it wise? And I heard whispers from the servants that there is a child. Eamon laughed, a nervous, tittering sound. Surely not. Some orphan she picked up in her madness. You cannot possibly intend to house a stray in Cliveden House. Adrian turned from the window. The light caught the hard angles of his face, making him look like a statue carved from judgment. The boy is my son, Adrian said. Eamon went pale. Adrian, be reasonable. She has deceived you. It is a trick. A cuckoo in the nest. I warned you 5 years ago. You did warn me, Adrian interrupted. He walked back to the desk, leaning his knuckles on the wood. You warned me she was unfaithful. You warned me she was greedy. You warned me she was a liar. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it screamed. It is fascinating, Eamon, how often a man accuses others of the very sins he commits himself. Eamon stood up abruptly. I do not like your tone, Adrian. I came here out of concern for my sister and your reputation. If you are going to insult me after all I have done for you, all you have done, Adrian repeated. He opened the drawer, the one with the broken lock, and pulled out a single piece of paper. It was one of the forged receipts from the Yorkshire solicitor. He slid it across the desk. I found this interesting, Adrian said, his voice conversational. It is a receipt for £500, signed by Elara. But the date is from a week when she was bedridden with pneumonia, unable to lift a spoon, let alone a pen. I know this because I have her diary from that month. A diary she wrote on scraps of butcher paper because she couldn't afford stationery. Eamon looked at the paper. He didn't touch it. His face had gone from pale to grey. I don't know what you are implying, Eamon stammered, backing toward the door. There must be a mistake. I will speak to the solicitor. You won't, Adrian said, because the solicitor is currently liquidating his assets to pay me back the £3,000 he helped you steal. He was quite talkative, Eamon. Amazing what a man will say when he is facing prison. Eamon hit the doorframe. He looked trapped. The veneer of the gentleman cracked, revealing the desperate rat beneath. You can't prove it, Eamon hissed. It's her word against mine. A madwoman against a peer. Oh, I'm not going to sue you, Eamon, Adrian said, smiling. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Suing you would be private. It would be quiet. What? What are you going to do? I am going to Lady Jersey's ball tomorrow night, Adrian said. And so are you. You are going to attend. You are going to wear your finest coat. And you are going to watch. Watch what? Watch the resurrection, Adrian said. Get out of my house. Eamon fled. He didn't walk. He scrambled, the door slamming behind him. Adrian stood in the silence of the library. He felt no triumph. Not yet. The rat was scurrying back to its hole, terrified. Good. Fear makes men sloppy. He picked up the receipt and crushed it in his hand. Adrian found Alara in the nursery. The room had been transformed. The peeling wallpaper of the dower house was replaced by warmth, rich rugs, and toys that Thomas was currently ignoring in favour of staring at the fire. He was sitting on the rug, playing with a set of wooden soldiers Adrian had dug out of the attic. His own soldiers from 30 years ago. Alara was sitting in a rocking chair, watching him. She was wearing a new dress, a simple gown of dove grey silk that the dressmaker had delivered that morning on Adrian's urgent orders. It fit her ill. She was still too thin, the fabric hanging loosely on her frame. She looked up when Adrian entered. The fear was always there in her eyes, a reflex he hated. He was here, she said. It wasn't a question. He was, Adrian confirmed. He walked over to the fire, warming his hands. He came to sniff around, to see if his lies were holding. And he left terrified, Adrian said. He looked down at Thomas. He knows the game is up, Alara. He just doesn't know how it will end. Alara stopped rocking. He is dangerous, Adrian. You don't know him like I do. He twists things. He will say Thomas is a bastard. He will say I am insane. He will tell everyone about the portrait. Let him, Adrian said. Let him say whatever he wants. You don't understand. Alara stood up, her voice rising. London feeds on scandal. If he plants that seed, it will grow. Thomas will be the bastard duke for the rest of his life. And I will be the whore who sold her face. Alara, Adrian said, stepping close to her. He didn't touch her. He had learned that lesson, but he invaded her space with his conviction. Listen to me. Eamon thinks he fights with whispers. He thinks he fights in the dark. But tomorrow night, we are dragging him into the light. Tomorrow? Alara looked panicked. Lady Jersey's ball. Adrian, I can't. Look at me. She gestured to her thin frame, her hollow cheeks. I am a scarecrow. I am a ghost. They will eat me alive. No, Adrian said firmly. They will see a queen returning from war. He went to the door and signalled. A train of servants entered. They carried boxes, large, flat boxes, bearing the crest of the finest dressmaker in London, Madame Delacroix. I took the liberty, Adrian said, of ordering something specific. The grey is fine for the nursery. But for tomorrow, you need armour. Alara stared at the boxes. I don't want your gifts. It is not a gift, Adrian said. It is a weapon. Open it. Hesitantly, Alara undid the ribbon of the largest box. She lifted the lid and pulled back the tissue paper. She gasped. It was not a pastel debutante gown. It was not a modest matron's dress. It was velvet. Deep, dark violet. The colour of royalty, of power, and of bruising. It was almost black in the dim light, but it shimmered with an inner amethyst fire. The neckline was daring, the cut severe and structural. It was a dress meant to command a room, not to blend into it. Violet, Alara whispered, running a rough finger over the soft pile. The colour of mourning, Adrian said. For the years we lost, and the colour of queens. He reached into the box and pulled out a smaller velvet case. He snapped it open. Inside lay the Cliveden diamonds. A heavy, intricate necklace of white diamonds and dark sapphires that had not been worn since his mother died. They were heavy, cold, and undeniably legitimate. Eamon will try to say you are a fraud, Adrian said. He will try to say you are poor, mad, and broken. You will walk into that ballroom wearing the family vault around your neck. You will wear a dress that no madwoman could afford. You will stand beside me, And you will not say a word. You will let the diamonds speak. You will let the boy's face speak. Alara looked from the dress to the jewels, and then to Adrian. She saw the calculation in his eyes, the cold, ruthless strategy. He was not asking her to be his wife in that moment. He was asking her to be his ally in a coup. And Thomas? She asked. Mrs. Gable will bring him, Adrian said. He will not stay for the ball, of course, but he will make an entrance, just for a moment, long enough for the old bats to see his eyes, long enough for them to see the Cliveden jaw. Alara touched the sapphires. They were cold, but they felt solid, real, unlike the empty promises of the last 5 years. I am afraid, she admitted, her voice small. Good, Adrian said. Fear keeps you sharp. I am afraid too. I am afraid that if I do not destroy him tomorrow, I will kill him with my bare hands. And then I will be no use to our son. He closed the jewelry case and placed it in her hand. Wear the armor, Alara. Fight with me, just this once. And after tomorrow, if you want to leave, if you want to go back to the country, a different estate, a warm one, I will not stop you, but finish this first. Alara looked at him. For the first time, she didn't see the tyrant who had banished her. She saw a man who was as desperate for redemption as she was for safety. She gripped the case tight. I will wear it, she said. I will wear the purple. But I do it for Thomas, not for you. That is all I expect, Adrian said. He bowed to her, a formal, courtly bow that acknowledged her status, and turned to leave the nursery. He walked down the hall, his footsteps echoing on the plush carpet. He felt the weight of the coming night pressing on him. Tomorrow, he would gamble everything. He would drag his family scandals into the brightest spotlight in England. If it worked, he would clear Alara's name and secure Thomas's future. If it failed, if Eamon's whispers were louder than the truth, then they would all burn. Adrian went back to the library. He poured another brandy. He sat in the dark, watching the rain streak the window, waiting for the music to begin. Lady Jersey's Ball, London, November 1823. The carriage ride to Olmac's assembly rooms was a journey through a tunnel of silence. Outside, the London rain had finally ceased, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the gaslight like polished obsidian. Inside the velvet-lined compartment, the air was thick with the scent of nerves and determination. Alara sat rigid against the squabs. She was no longer the woman in rags scrubbing a stone floor in Yorkshire. She was a vision of dark, regal splendor. The gown Adrian had commissioned was a masterpiece of structural engineering and artistic defiance. It was velvet, a deep, saturated violet that looked black in the shadows and blazed with amethyst fire when the light caught it. It was the color of bruising, yes, but also the color of emperors. Around her neck, the Cliveden sapphires felt like a yoke of ice. The heavy stones, set in intricate silver and diamond filigree, rested against her collarbones, a physical weight that reminded her of the burden she was about to shoulder. Adrian sat opposite her. He was dressed in severe black, his evening coat cut to perfection, a stark contrast to the crisp white of his cravat. He looked dangerous. He looked like a weapon sheathed in silk. You are trembling, he said softly. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. I am about to walk into a room full of people who have spent the last 5 years forgetting I exist, Alara replied, her voice tight. Or worse, remembering me only as a punchline. Eamon will be there. He will have poisoned them all. Let him poison them, Adrian said, leaning forward to take her gloved hand. His grip was warm, steadying. Poison takes time to work. The truth is an antidote that works instantly. Remember what I told you. You do not speak. You do not defend yourself. You stand. You let the diamonds and the dress do the talking. I will handle the rest. And Thomas? Alara asked, glancing toward the second carriage following them, where Mrs. Gable and the boy were riding. He will be in the private anteroom with the footman. He will be safe. He is the ace up my sleeve, Alara, not a prop. I will only play him if Eamon forces my hand. The carriage slowed, joining the queue of vehicles outside the assembly rooms. The noise of the crowd, the shouting of footmen, and the clatter of hooves seeped through the walls. Ready? Adrian asked. Ilara took a deep breath. She thought of the cold nights in Willow Creek. She thought of the hunger. She thought of Eamon's smiling face as he stole her life away. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's burn him down." The entrance to the ballroom was a gauntlet. The air was hot, perfumed, and loud with the hum of 300 conversations. The chandeliers overhead cast a ruthless golden light that left no imperfection hidden. When the major domo banged his staff on the floor, the sound cut through the chatter like a gunshot. "His Grace, the Duke of Harrogate, and Her Grace, the Duchess of Harrogate." The silence that followed was instantaneous and absolute. It started near the door and rippled outward like a wave, extinguishing laughter and gossip until the only sound was the rustle of silk and the distant tuning of a violin. Adrian stepped into the light, looking neither left nor right. He offered his arm to Ilara. She took it. She stepped forward. A collective gasp went through the room. They had expected a ghost. They had expected a broken woman, perhaps mad, perhaps dressed in country dowdiness. Instead, they saw a queen. The violet dress absorbed the light, making Ilara's pale skin look like marble. The sapphires at her throat blazed with a cold blue fire that matched the intensity of her husband's eyes. She was thin. Yes, her cheekbones were sharp enough to cut glass, but it gave her an ethereal, haunting beauty that made the plump debutantes in the room look common by comparison. She walked with a slow, deliberate cadence, her chin held high. She did not smile. She scanned the crowd with her green eyes, challenging them to look away. No one did. "Keep walking," Adrian murmured, his face impassive. "Center of the room. We take the floor." They moved through the parted sea of guests. Whispers began to hiss behind them, like steam escaping a valve. "Is that her? The jewels. Look at the jewels. I thought she was in an asylum. Eamon said she ran off with a stable hand." Adrian ignored them all. He led Ilara to the edge of the dance floor, where the patronesses of Almack's held court. He bowed to Lady Jersey, a sharp-eyed woman who thrived on scandal but respected power. "Your Grace," Lady Jersey said, her fan snapping shut. "We did not expect the pleasure of your company tonight. Or your wife's." "It has been too long," Adrian said smoothly. "My wife has been recovering her health in the country. The air in Yorkshire is bracing, but we felt it was time to return to society." "Indeed," Lady Jersey murmured, her eyes raking over Ilara's dress. "And what a dramatic return it is. That colour, my dear. It is very bold." "It is violet, my lady," Ilara said, her voice clear and steady. "The colour of survival." Lady Jersey's eyebrows rose. Before she could respond, a voice cut through the tension. A loud, jovial voice that carried a frantic edge. "Adrian! Ilara! My goodness!" It was Eamon Vance. He pushed through the crowd, his face flushed, a glass of wine in his hand. He was wearing a coat of emerald green velvet, and he was smiling the smile of a man who is terrified but trying to bluff his way through a poker game with empty cards. He stopped a few feet away, creating a circle of confrontation. The crowd pressed in, sensing blood. "I must say," Eamon announced, pitching his voice to carry to the onlookers, "I am surprised to see you here, Ilara. After our last correspondence, I thought you preferred the quiet of the sanitarium. Is it wise to be out in such a stimulating environment?" The trap was laid. He was publicly labeling her as mad. Adrian stepped slightly in front of Ilara. "Eamon, you seem flushed. Perhaps you have had too much wine. Or is it the heat of your conscience?" Eamon laughed, a brittle sound. "Conscience? I have nothing to hide, dear brother. I am only concerned for my sister. Everyone knows of her delicate condition and her history." Eamon turned to the crowd, his eyes glittering with malice. He had to destroy her now, or be destroyed. He decided to burn the bridge while standing on it. "It is a brave man who parades a wife with such a colourful past," Eamon sneered, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that everyone could hear. "Tell me, Adrian, did you find her where I heard she was? In Covent Garden? I heard rumours of a certain portrait, hanging in a house of ill repute, a portrait of the Duchess herself." The gasp this time was audible. Fans fluttered wildly. The accusation of prostitution, even implied, was a social death sentence. Ilara went rigid. This was the nightmare. He was using her sacrifice as a weapon. Eamon wasn't finished. He saw the shock in the crowd and pressed his advantage. And the child she brought with her, the boy, is he here too? I assume he is waiting in the stables with his true father. It is noble of you to take in a bastard, Adrian, but to present him as... Silence. Adrian didn't shout. He didn't have to. The command cracked like a whip. He let go of Ilara's arm and took 2 steps toward Eamon. Adrian was taller, broader, and infinitely more dangerous. The air around him seemed to drop in temperature. You speak of a portrait, Adrian said, his voice carrying to the back of the room. And you speak of a child. He turned to the crowd. He looked at the faces of the lords and ladies who judged lives as a hobby. My brother-in-law is correct, Adrian announced. There was a portrait of my wife. I found it myself, 3 days ago, hanging in the office of a brothel in Covent Garden. The crowd murmured. Eamon smirked, thinking he had won. But do you know why it was there? Adrian asked, his voice rising, imbued with a cold, righteous fury. It was not sold for vice. It was not sold for gambling debts, unlike the debts Lord Vance incurs nightly. He pointed a finger at Eamon, who flinched. It was sold because for 5 years this man, Adrian gestured to Eamon, intercepted the allowance I sent to my wife. He stole £500 a month. He left the Duchess of Harrogate to starve in a ruin with no roof. He left her to scrub floors, to freeze. Lies, Eamon shouted, though his voice wavered. She is mad. She invents things. And when our son fell ill with pneumonia, Adrian continued, overriding him. When he was dying for lack of medicine and coal, my wife did not come to me, because this man told her I would reject her. She did not turn to a lover because she has none. She took the only thing of value she had left, a painting of her own face, and she sold it to a pawnbroker to save the life of my heir. Adrian turned back to Ilara, extending his hand to her. She stepped forward, tears shining in her eyes, but her head still high. You look at this woman, and you see diamonds, Adrian said to the room. I look at her, and I see a mother who walked through hell to protect her child. I see a woman of honor. The portrait in the brothel was not a mark of shame. It was a monument to her sacrifice, and an indictment of my own blindness. The room was silent. Shame, hot and prickly, began to replace the scandal in the air. As for the child, Adrian said, turning his lethal gaze back to Eamon. You call him a bastard. You call him a stable boy's get. Eamon was sweating profusely now. It is common knowledge, the timeline, the separation. Mr. Henderson, Adrian shouted toward the double doors. Bring him in. The doors opened. Mrs. Gable walked in. She was dressed in her best black bombazine, looking severe and proud. Holding her hand was Thomas. The boy was dressed in a miniature version of Adrian's evening suit, black velvet coat, white breeches. He was pale, wide-eyed, terrified by the sea of faces. Adrian walked over and picked the boy up. He lifted him high, turning him so the light of the chandeliers hit his face. There was no need for words. The resemblance was not just strong, it was a genetic copy. The raven black hair, the sharp, distinctive Cliveden nose, and the eyes, those deep, dark blue eyes that were the hallmark of the Dukes of Harrogate for 6 generations. Look at him, Adrian roared. Look at his face and tell me he is not mine. He walked toward Eamon, holding the boy. Eamon stumbled back, knocking over a tray of champagne glasses. The crash was deafening in the silence. Well, Eamon? Adrian challenged. Is this the stable boy's son? Or is he the living proof of your treachery? Eamon opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the crowd. He saw no support. He saw only disgust. The Ton could forgive adultery. They could forgive debt. They could not forgive the starvation of a peer's child and the theft of a duke's gold. Sir William, Adrian called out. A grey-haired man stepped out from behind a pillar near the entrance. It was the Chief Magistrate of London, whom Adrian had visited that afternoon. Lord Vance, Sir William said, his voice grave. I have reviewed the documents provided by His Grace, the forged receipts. The testimony of Mr. Pendergast from Yorkshire, and the bank records. 2 constables appeared at the magistrate's side. You are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery, Sir William stated. You can't do this here, Eamon shrieked, his dignity finally shattering completely. I am a peer. I demand… Adrian, tell them. We are family. Adrian looked at him over the head of his son. He stroked Thomas's hair, calming the boy. Family? Adrian said softly. You left my family to die in the cold, Eamon. You are no kin of mine. He turned his back. The constables moved in. Eamon struggled, shouting obscenities, accusing Ilara of witchcraft, accusing Adrian of tyranny. He was dragged out of the ballroom, his emerald coat bunched up, his heels dragging on the floor. The doors slammed shut behind him. The silence in the room stretched out, heavy and awkward. No one knew what to do. The music had stopped. The scandal of the decade had just played out in front of them. Adrian handed Thomas back to Mrs. Gable, kissing the boy on the forehead. Take him home. He has done his duty perfectly. Mrs. Gable nodded, tears in her eyes, and led the boy away. Adrian turned to Ilara. She was standing alone in the centre of the floor, the violet dress shimmering. She looked exhausted, but she was standing. He walked to her. He took her hand. He bowed low, pressing his lips to her gloved knuckles. My Duchess, he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. May I have this dance? Ilara looked down at him. She saw the apology in his eyes. She saw the promise. There is no music, Adrian, she whispered. Adrian stood up and looked at the conductor of the orchestra, who was staring open-mouthed from the balcony. Play, Adrian commanded. A waltz. The conductor scrambled. The violins began, a little shaky at first, then finding their rhythm. The melody of a Strauss waltz filled the room. Adrian placed his hand on Ilara's waist. It was a possessive, protective touch. He swept her into the turn. For the first few bars, they were the only ones moving. The rest of the court stood frozen, watching the violet dress swirl against the black coat. They are staring, Ilara murmured against his chest. Let them stare, Adrian said, his eyes locked on hers. Let them see that the winter is over. Let them see that the House of Cliveden does not break. Slowly, tentatively, other couples began to join the floor. Lady Jersey was the first, dragging a reluctant Lord Jersey with her, signalling to the room that the Duke and Duchess were to be accepted. Then others followed. The scandal was over. The legend had begun. Ilara rested her head for a fleeting second against Adrian's shoulder. The diamonds were heavy, the corset was tight, and the eyes of London were upon her. But for the first time in 5 years, she was warm. And as they spun under the golden lights, she knew that Eamon was in a cold cell, and her son was sleeping in a warm bed. The portrait in the brothel was just paint and canvas. The reality was here, in the arms of the man who had finally come home. Cliveden House, London, December 1823. The scandal that had erupted at Lady Jersey's ball had burned through London like a fever, hot and violent, but like all fevers, it had eventually broken. In its wake, it left a clarity that the Ton was not accustomed to. The whispers about the bastard Duke had been strangled in their cribs, silenced by the undeniable genetic testimony of Thomas's face and the crushing weight of Adrian's legal fury. Eamon Vance was no longer a fixture of the card rooms and salons. He was currently a guest of His Majesty at Newgate Prison, awaiting transportation to Van Diemen's Land. The forensic audit Adrian had unleashed had uncovered not just the theft of Ilara's allowance, but a spiderweb of fraud involving 3 other estates and a charity fund for war widows. Eamon had not just been ruined, he had been erased, his name becoming a cautionary tale whispered by solicitors to their wayward clients. But inside the limestone walls of Cliveden House, the silence was of a different quality. It was not the silence of secrets, but the tentative, fragile quiet of a garden after a storm, where the survivors cautiously poke their heads out to see if the sun is truly shining. Adrian Cliveden stood outside the double doors of the North Wing's solarium. He adjusted his cuffs, a nervous habit he had developed only recently. He was the Duke of Harrogate, a man who commanded vast tracts of land and hundreds of souls. Yet he found himself hesitating before knocking on a door in his own house. He had given this wing to Elara. It was her sanctuary. He had decreed that no servant, and certainly no husband, was to enter without invitation. It was the only way he knew to give her back the autonomy he had stolen 5 years ago. He knocked. 3 sharp, distinct raps. "Enter!" came the voice from within. It was stronger now, lacking the raspy edge of the Yorkshire cough. Adrian opened the door and stepped into the light. The solarium was the brightest room in the house, a glass-walled testament to Georgian architecture that caught every scrap of winter sun. It smelled of turpentine, linseed oil, and hyacinths. The flowers Adrian had ordered the gardener to force bloom because he remembered from a life ago that she loved them. Elara was standing at her easel. She wore a simple smock over a day dress of pale green muslin. Her hair, now washed and brushed into a gleaming cascade of gold, was tied back loosely with a ribbon. She looked healthier. The hollows in her cheeks had filled out, the shadows under her eyes replaced by the natural colour of a woman who slept in a warm bed and ate proper meals. She didn't turn immediately. She was applying a stroke of umber to the canvas, her concentration absolute. "I hope I am not disturbing the artist," Adrian said, closing the door softly. Elara lowered her brush. She turned, wiping her hands on a rag. The artist was merely struggling with a shadow. Distraction is welcome. She looked at him. There was still a wariness in her green eyes, a residual flinch that broke his heart every time he saw it. But it was fading, slowly, day by day. "I brought you something," Adrian said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather-bound book. "It is a catalogue from the auction at Sotheby's. They are selling a collection of Italian pigments next week. I thought you might find something of use." Elara took the book. Her fingers brushed his, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt through him. "Thank you, Adrian," she said softly. "This is thoughtful." "I am trying," he said, the admission raw. "I am trying to learn the difference between providing and caring. It seems I mastered the former and failed spectacularly at the latter." Elara offered him a small, sad smile. "You provided coal when we were freezing. That was caring in its own way." "That was duty," Adrian corrected. This is me wanting to see you paint again." He walked past her, moving deeper into the room. The solarium was filled with her sketches. Studies of Thomas playing, charcoal drawings of Mrs. Gable, landscapes of the view from the window. And then he stopped. In the far corner, resting on a velvet-draped stand, was a painting he knew intimately, the portrait from the brothel. The woman in the blue dress sat in her eternal sorrow, her painted eyes looking down at hands that held nothing. The frame, heavy and gilded, looked out of place in this room of light and fresh beginnings. It was a dark hole in the fabric of the studio. Adrian felt a physical wave of nausea. He hated that painting. He hated it with a violence that frightened him. "Why is this here?" he asked, his voice dropping to a growl. Elara followed his gaze. She didn't rush to cover it. She stood her ground. "I asked the footman to bring it up from the storage," she said calmly. "Storage?" Adrian turned to her, his blue eyes blazing. "I ordered it to be burned. I told Henderson to take it to the furnace. And I countermanded that order," Elara said. She walked over to the painting, standing beside her tragic likeness. "It is my property, Adrian. I paid for it with 5 years of my life. You bought it with gold. I bought it with blood." "It hung in a whorehouse, Elara," Adrian shouted, the control slipping. "Men looked at it while they... It is a desecration. It is a monument to my failure. Every time I look at it, I see you starving. I see you walking into a pawn shop in the rain. I want it gone. I want to destroy it, so that version of you never has to exist again." "But she did exist," Elara said. She reached out and touched the painted cheek of the woman on the canvas. "She existed. She survived. She took the only thing she had, her vanity, her face, her image, and she traded it for her son's life." She turned to Adrian, her expression fierce. "You look at this, and you see your guilt. You see the Duke who failed. But I look at this, and I see the woman who won. I see the woman who didn't break. If you burn this, Adrian, You are burning the proof of my strength. You are trying to sanitize history because it hurts you to look at it." Adrian stared at her. The truth of her words struck him like a physical blow. He had wanted to destroy the painting to make himself feel better, to erase the visual evidence of his cruelty. He slumped, the anger draining out of him, leaving only the familiar ache of remorse. "I cannot bear it," he whispered. "I cannot bear to see her so sad." "Then don't look at her," Alara said gently. "Look at me." Adrian lifted his eyes. He looked at the woman standing in the sunlit room. She was real. She was breathing. She was vibrant. "I see you," he said. "This painting stays," Alara declared, covering it back up with a silk cloth. "It will stay in the corner. A reminder, a warning, lest we ever forget what silence can do to a marriage." Adrian nodded slowly. He accepted the penance. "Very well," he said. "It stays. But on one condition." Alara raised an eyebrow. "You are in no position to make demands, Your Grace." "A request, then," Adrian corrected himself, moving closer to her. "A humble petition." He gestured to the empty easel, the blank canvas waiting for paint. "Paint a new one." Alara looked at the blank white square. "A new portrait?" "Yes," Adrian said. "Paint the truth of today. Paint the spring, not the winter. Paint yourself as you are now, strong, safe, the mother of the air." "I don't paint self-portraits anymore," Alara said, looking away. "The mirror is difficult." "Then don't paint just yourself," Adrian said. "Paint us. Paint Thomas." At the mention of the boy's name, the door to the studio burst open. "Papa! Mama!" Thomas ran into the room, a whirlwind of energy and noise. He was dressed in a miniature riding coat, his cheeks flushed pink from the cold outside. He had spent the morning at the stables with the new pony Adrian had bought him, a patient grey mare named Duchess. Adrian dropped to one knee instantly, catching the boy as he barreled into him. The impact was solid, real. Thomas smelled of horses, cold air, and lavender soap. "Did you stay in the saddle today?" Adrian asked, ruffling the boy's black hair, hair that mirrored his own. "I trotted," Thomas announced, his blue eyes shining. "Mr. Henderson said I have a seat like a centaur." "High praise indeed." Adrian laughed, picking the boy up and standing. He looked over Thomas's head at Alara. "See? He is not the boy shivering under a curtain anymore. He is a Cliveden." Alara watched them, the tall, powerful man holding the small, dark-haired boy. They were two halves of the same whole. The fear that had lived in her chest for so long, the fear that Adrian would reject the boy, or that the boy would fear the father, had dissolved in the face of Adrian's relentless, overwhelming love for his son. "He looks like you," Alara said softly. "When he smiles. He has your spirit," Adrian countered. "He is stubborn. I tried to tell him to hold the reins differently, and he told me that Mama says to hold on tight. And that was the end of the discussion." Thomas giggled. "Mama is always right." "That she is," Adrian agreed solemnly. "A lesson I learned too late, but one I shall never forget." He looked at Alara, his expression turning serious. "Let us sit for you," Adrian said. "Right now, while the light is good. Paint us. Put us on that canvas, so that when Thomas is an old man, he can look back and see that he was loved. Let us replace the memory of the blue dress with something warm." Alara looked at her palette. She looked at the tubes of paint, the vibrant crimsons, the rich ochres, the expensive lapis lazuli. She picked up her brush. "Sit," she ordered. On the chaise, near the window, Adrian sat. He situated Thomas on his lap. The boy leaned back against his father's chest with a natural ease, trusting the strength that held him. Adrian wrapped his arms around his son, his chin resting lightly on the top of Thomas's head. The sun streamed in, bathing them in gold. It caught the shine of their black hair, the intense blue of their eyes, the stark white of Adrian's shirt, and the soft velvet of Thomas's coat. It was a picture of absolute, unshakable security. Alara felt a lump in her throat. She dipped her brush into the paint. She didn't start with the shadows this time. She started with the light. She painted for hours. The silence in the room was companionable, broken only by Thomas's occasional whispers and Adrian's low, murmuring replies. She painted the curve of Adrian's protective hand. She painted the brightness in Thomas's eyes. As the afternoon sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the floor, Adrian spoke. "Elara." She was mixing a shade of grey for the background. "I love you." The brush stopped mid-stroke. It was the first time he had said it. Not in the past, not in the days of their arranged courtship, and certainly not in the years of their marriage. He had spoken of duty, of admiration, of desire, but never love. Thomas had fallen asleep against Adrian's chest, his thumb near his mouth. Elara looked over the top of the canvas. Adrian was looking at her, stripped of all his defences. He looked vulnerable, this powerful duke who could crush men with a word. "You don't have to say it back," he said quickly, sensing her hesitation. "I know I have not earned it yet. I know the ledger is still red. But I wanted you to know. I didn't come to Yorkshire for the heir, Elara. I came for the woman in the painting. And I stayed for the woman scrubbing the floor." Elara looked at him. She looked at the painting taking shape on her easel, a painting of a family that was no longer broken, but fused back together. There is a Japanese art called kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold lacquer. The philosophy is that the break is not something to be hidden, but a part of the history of the object, making it more beautiful and valuable than it was before. They were kintsugi. The break had been brutal. The separation had been agonizing. But the gold that held them together now, the gold of shared trauma, of Thomas's existence, of truth finally spoken, was stronger than the pristine, fragile porcelain of their early marriage had ever been. She put the brush down. She wiped her hands. She walked across the room. Adrian watched her come, his breath held. She didn't stop until she was standing between his knees, her skirts brushing against his boots. She reached out and touched his face, her hand cupping his jaw. Her thumb traced the line of his cheekbone. "You are a fool, Adrian Cliveden," she whispered. "I know," he breathed, leaning into her touch. "But," she continued, her voice trembling slightly, "you are my fool, and you are his father." She leaned down and pressed a kiss to his forehead, right between his eyes. It was a benediction. It was a seal. "I don't know if I love you yet," she admitted honestly. "The winter was very long, Adrian. The frost went deep." She pulled back, looking into his eyes. "But the spring is here, and I am willing to watch the garden grow." Adrian closed his eyes, letting out a breath that sounded like a prayer answered. He turned his face and kissed the palm of her hand. "That is enough," he said. "That is more than I deserve." He shifted Thomas slightly, making room. "Sit with us, just for a moment. Be in the picture." Elara hesitated, then sat on the edge of the chaise. Adrian's arm came around her, pulling her close, completing the circle. She rested her head on his shoulder, next to her son's sleeping form. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the London sky in shades of violet and gold. The colours of her dress, the colours of the new day. In the corner, under the silk cloth, the woman in the blue dress slept in her eternal sorrow. But in the centre of the room, in the warmth of the light, the woman in the green dress closed her eyes and listened to the steady, strong beating of her husband's heart. The winter was over, the debt was paid, and the Duke of Harrogate had finally, truly claimed his wife.